going back to Roger Stone, Roger, please, because a lot of these questions I want to go over are really just advice you're giving the president, and I know he really respects your countenance as a longtime advisor and a former chief advisor. So I really would like you to have the floor and just talk about the race, talk about your views on that, as all Americans have a right to do. But when I likened you to Spartacus, because you are the guy in the arena, you are the guy being targeted like nobody else right now, even worse than Trump. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, Teddy Roosevelt, and that's a Spartacus archetype, and you wanted to make a comment on that.
Yeah, it's kind of important, Alex. You know, last week, PolitiFact, which is financed by the Walter Annenberg Foundation, published a story that said that an interview that I had done regarding Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, was incorrect. I said that Cory Booker, as mayor, had essentially laundered a $600,000 payment through the city watershed authority to his law firm, which he then pocketed. And they say that it's false. No, on the contrary, PolitiFact, not only is it true, but I have written an entire book on the subject, which is entitled Spartacus, the unauthorized biography of Cory Booker. This book will be published in late November. And without getting into detail today, I prove definitively the incredible corruption of Cory Booker when he was mayor, including the theft of $600,000 in taxpayers' money laundered through the city water authority to his law firm, to his pockets. Now, to go back to the situation regarding the president, I think it's very important to recognize that everything that is playing out in Washington is playing out with the backdrop of the president's courageous decision to remove our troops from Syria. I have never seen a more ferocious mainstream media neocon-driven backlash than that orchestrated by some elements of the media, going so far at ABC of falsifying footage that was actually at a Kentucky rifle range and calling it violence by the Turks against the Kurds in Syria. They're literally frothing at the mouth on some of the Fox programming. Ironically, I think the president's decision helps him. He ran as a non-interventionist. He made it very clear at the Republican convention, throughout the campaign, and throughout his presidency, that he was committed to ending the endless foreign wars that we were giving open-ended commitments to in terms of both blood and treasure, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Afghanistan, whether it is Syria. I think he understands the American people have had enough. And you saw the results in Dallas in that rally, not far from you. I saw you drive up in an armored vehicle, which I thought was pretty cool. I think the people are fed up with endless foreign war, and the disinformation regarding Syria is really quite extraordinary. No, all of the Kurds are not Christians. Many of them are Muslims. No, many of the Kurds are Marxists. There's a very substantial radical Marxist element. No, the 200 troops, 200 individual troops that we have in that part of Syria could not have stopped an onslaught from Turkey anyway. And I think the Trump-Pence administration at this point is working to hold together this ceasefire. So those who say that this weakens him with the people, I think are incorrect. Now, does it weaken him in the Senate, where you have a disproportionate number of neocon Republican senators? I think that that is entirely possible, which is why I reiterate that the president should now, today, be using his campaign treasury, which he can legally do, to get his side of all these issues out, whether it is Ukraine, whether it is Syria, in those states where you have wobbly or soft Republican senators. Speaking of Republican senators, a word has to be said about Willard Mitt Romney. If you are a longtime watcher of InfoWars, you know that both on the Alex Jones show and on the War Room, I warned about Mitt Romney. A man does not run for the U.S. Senate in a state he does not live in, taking a legislative job when he's had an executive position his entire adult life, because he wants to be a junior backbencher in the U.S. Senate. He ran for the Senate in order to launch another bid for president. He not only had the audacity to ask the president to muscle out the Republican state treasurer in Utah, who would have made a great U.S. senator, to clear the Republican primary field for him. And then the president endorsed Willard the Rat. What he's gotten in return is a knife right between the shoulder blades, because Mitt Romney is fired, I think, by both ambition and jealousy. After all, he ran twice for president, after running for the U.S. Senate and successfully for governor. And along comes a New York businessman who's never run for anything, and he wins the presidency. I think John McCain had the same problem, that Trump won the prize that eluded them. But I see this error being compounded, Alex. I saw the president's warm endorsement for Ben Sasse the other day. And Sasse will reward that endorsement, where the president is very, very popular in Nebraska. He will reward that endorsement with treachery. I don't know who is making these decisions, but putting Mitt Romney in a position where he can challenge the president was not wise. The good news, Donald Trump's approval rating among Republicans, among Republican primary voters, is higher than any president I've ever seen. I mean, I worked for the great Ronald Reagan in the 76, 1980, and 1984 campaigns. He goes down in my book as one of the greatest presidents in American history. His approval rating among Republicans was always in the high 80s, which we thought was phenomenal at the time. But I saw a Florida poll just the other day that showed the president's approval rating at 94 among Florida Republicans. So the bad news for Mitt Romney or Bill Weld, who's actually a friend of mine, despite our ardent disagreement on so many things, or anyone else who wants to challenge Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, is there is no market. There is no vacuum. Donald Trump will be the nominee of his party, and he's remaking the party in his own image. This has always been a historical truth.
Well, you're right, Roger. We got to go to break, but Governor Weld also said Trump should be executed for treason on Ukraine. So I know you've got to, can't get into too much of it, but specifically, you called Fiona Hill here on record. It's got national attention last week that you called it here. You talked about the ambassador and warned about Taylor. You also specifically warned about Romney. And then Hillary, we know, wants to get back in. They've got a plan to remove Trump before the election. Then Pelosi becomes president, because they get rid of Pence too. And then she appoints Hillary vice president. And I guess Romney would be the placeholder and I guess run against Hillary. We'll talk about all those angles straight ahead with Roger Stone. And Roger Stone is go to communicate with the president, the American people, all of you. He is a top political analyst. The system, the WikiLeaks show, fears him. And they don't just ban people on the internet now. They arrest them. And that is where we are in the fight for this republic and this country. And Roger Stone's going to go a little bit with us into the next hour. He has not spoken to the media in over 4 months. And I was going over the list of questions I had with him, checking over during the break, making sure that doesn't violate any of the things that are out there. It's very Kafka-esque. You can't even mention the things that are out there. And it just shows where free speech is in this country. It's embattled. It's on its knees. But it's coming back. I would really just want to say that Fiona Hill, the Soros moles, McMaster, everything you said a year before came out that he was at this dinner event with these donors talking crap about the president, word for word. That was all confirmed later. New York Post, it was admitted he was fired. how they'd come at Trump, how they'd do it, how they were going to use Ukraine, who the operatives were. No wonder they were so scared of you and I. People thought I knew all this stuff. I knew some of it. You had all the contacts. That's why they were so enraged by you, because literally it was like you had a time machine or something. I mean, a crystal ball. And so now, recap what you were right about that you can get into, and then what is your latest emergency portend? Because I remember you telling Owen Schroyer 2 months for the election, you bet a tomahawk steak and all the beer he could drink that, you know, the Republicans would lose the House. And I unfortunately, you know, had to agree with you. You were proven right, not bashing Owen, but I mean, you are the Karnak for real. So the president, the world, I mean, top link on Drudge. What do you want to say, Roger? What were you right about that you can recap? And then what's the latest of the over the horizon radar?
Well, Alex, I think anybody watching this broadcast understands that I don't direct you what to say. You speak for yourself. I speak for myself.
100%.
And I would have planned today to give the president a warning, because I know many around him are saying, don't worry, Mr. President, the Republicans in the Senate would never vote to remove you. However, this tongue lashing he gave the Republicans the other day, where he pointed out that the Democrats stick together and the Republicans don't, tell me he's already gotten an important message. He needs to take this impeachment inquiry very, very seriously. Now, I don't candidly know anything about Ambassador William Taylor other than what I have read, but I always thought that there were too many holdovers in the Trump administration, particularly in the foreign policy area. And for reasons I never quite understood, the president had a succession of national security advisors who did not share his non-interventionist views. It was General McMaster who brought in Fiona Hill. Fiona Hill, Harvard, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, worked for the Soros Open Society Institute, very clearly not a Trump Republican, to say the least. It appears that she is one of the witnesses in this inquiry. So I guess my message to the president is take this very seriously, continue to demand total transparency, stay very focused on those states with wobbly Republican senators. That is where this fight will be won or lost. Here is one of the great pluses of this whole matter, Alex, and that is I had been speaking to Republican and Trump and conservative gatherings around the country, and I said repeatedly that the greatest obstacle to the president's reelection was the overconfidence of his supporters. I have absolute confidence in Donald Trump's ability as a campaigner, absolute confidence in his stamina, absolute confidence in his energy, absolute confidence in his communication skills. But everywhere I would go across the country, people would tell me, Trump supporters would tell me, it's going to be a landslide. It's going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be a walk in the park. None of those things are true. They're not true. They weren't true then. They're not true now. But what the impeachment inquiry has done is galvanize the president's support as never before. I spoke to an Americans for Trump gathering in Broward County night before last. And there's an energy level, there's a commitment that was not there before. The Democratic field may seem inconsequential to you today, but that's a bad judgment. Assuming that Hillary Clinton does not enter this race, I believe that Joe Biden's candidacy is already in the ascendancy. He never started very strong to begin with, given that he was an 8-year vice president. I predicted here and elsewhere that Elizabeth Warren was the candidate to watch. She is extraordinarily better organized than anyone on the ground in Iowa. When it comes to New Hampshire, historically, New Hampshire has an affinity for candidates from neighboring states. Henry Cabot Lodge, Michael Dukakis, Bernie Sanders, they all come to mind. Ed Muskie. So it is important to recognize that her candidacy, I think, is not only potent, but that she has kind of a goofy, likable quality, and she can sound very populist. I mean, she wants to break up Google. Alex, you want to break up Google. She doesn't wants to take on the big banks. Alex, you want to take on the big banks. So Republicans who think it would be an easy race, that you can just dismiss Elizabeth Warren as Pocahontas, are incorrect. Once the Democratic Party decides which socialist they are going to nominate, and their handmaidens in the Main Street media close ranks behind that candidate, the combination of the mainstream media onslaught on Trump, along with the institutional censorship of conservatives and libertarians and non-liberals and Trump supporters on all of these social media platforms, it shows that we will have an extraordinary, close, competitive race. I'm not worried about the president. I'm worried about his supporters. Frankly, I'm worried about some in his campaign who, perhaps out of lack of political experience and a great deep-seated belief in the president's skills, believe that this will somehow be easy. Good news, the president has retained Tony Fabrizio, who I believe is the single most brilliant analyst and political strategist in the Republican Party today. He's also a guy who isn't afraid to give his candidates bad news and good, solid advice about how to take polling numbers and actually translate them to action to make them work. That is very good news.
And Roger, I remember when you got him on the show, again, everything he's broken down has come true. And he was the one worried we were going to lose the House, and he was right in 2018. So let's talk about the next 30 minutes while we have you, some of the other questions that are coming up. We're very honored to have you here with us. I know it's a minefield of what you can and can't get into, but what you said was very, very important, very, very central, that I, too, saw a lot of Trump supporters very delusional that he's invincible, nothing's going to happen, when the deep state is openly trying to assassinate him. They're openly trying to break the borders. They're getting illegals signed up to vote. Trump really won by a tsunami. We know that. But election fraud, he almost lost. And so this is a real battle. People better not be overconfident. That's why I think folks like Drudge have shown what the enemy is saying and what the enemy is doing. And I think Drudge showing all the attacks and a lot of the negative stuff the last few months has woken a lot of conservatives up that, well, if Drudge is showing what the enemy's saying, then Trump might be in trouble. And, of course, Drudge was doing that before they made this big move. And that's why I've highlighted some of the negative things that are going on, because conservatives and libertarians and nationalists don't need to be in a bubble. We don't need to be in our own echo chamber like the left is. We need to be out there on the street like you and I are, really seeing what's going on. And if people think there was a fight in 2016, this is going to be the big one. And I think that's what we're saying, is we don't have this in the bag if people go CP time. Is that what you're saying?
That's precisely what I'm saying. And Republicans need to look at 2018, not 2016. If we are hampered the same way, say, on Facebook, institutionally, all Republicans, that will be truly problematic.
And that's two of Trump's biggest failures. Hasn't taken action yet against big tech censorship. Says he would take strong action 4 months ago. Hasn't done it. Hasn't, stood up for the press that's been persecuted. It's just amazing. Wow. We've got Roger Stone here with us right now live. And it's the hottest interview on talk radio, on the internet right now. Thanks to all you spreading the word. Thanks to DrudgeReport.com. We'll be back with hour number 3 with Roger Stone.